You will conquer almost any fear if you will only make up your mind to do so. For remember, fear does not exist anywhere except in the mind. I'll just do the other two. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. To suffer terribly and to know yourself as a cause, that is hell.
Fear is the mind killer. You can't make a conscientious thought when you are in the grips of fear. So when we think of fear, we sometimes talk about the flight response. When people boil it down into just fight or flight, they forget the third part, which is freeze, right? Personal anecdote, I was in Afghanistan twice for combat deployments, and on my second time over there, we had an incident where we took a casualty from an improvised explosive device, and one of the guys who was just attached to our unit the night before, he ended up losing most of his right leg below the knee, almost all the way up until the knee, and bits of his fingertips and some other smaller things, but like overall, remarkably healthy considering what he just did, which was step on a bomb. And despite the situation being so early in the day with so many hands available to help, the person responsible for the immediate treatment of this gentleman is a Navy corpsman who's attached to our unit for the sole purpose of applying medicine when people are in aid or in need of aid. And what happens? He freezes. So the adrenaline of the moment tells you either get ready to run a marathon, eat 20 pizzas, or puke your guts out, right? Like you never know how your body's going to react to that adrenaline. In this case, that gentleman who should have been there to help, he froze. So myself, this guy, Bukema, who's also a corpsman, and this guy, Rickard, we put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We got him out of there. And we're talking the whole time. And one of the first things you do after you make sure that the person's breathing and you have a pulse is you treat for shock. And it's funny because, you know, you clear the airway, you check for breathing. Great. We assess that he's bleeding. We're stopping the bleeding, but continuous, right? Things on top of things. So as we're doing the triage in that moment of like, hey, we can cut these pants. You don't need them. Let's do this. Hey, let's do that. We're all communicating to each other and talking to the person, keeping him calm. Because, hate to tell you this, because it's a very tough topic, but if they're freaking out, their heart rate is going up. If their heart rate is going up,
more blood's going out.
And that's the unfortunate side of things. So as we're trying to get him to calm down and get to that, it's like, hey, you're past this threshold. This thing happened to you. We think you're going to be fine. You need to know that you're going to be fine for you first so that we can treat you better. And obviously, like, get him to not fight us and let us help him. So in that moment, you know, we do this, and then I have to get him onto basically like the equivalent of like a tarp, something to carry him by. A poleless litter is what they called it. But let's be real, it was just a piece of canvas. And myself, the lieutenant who was with us at the time, Lieutenant Remington, Rickard, and Bukema, the four of us each grabbed a corner, and we had to blow a hole in our compound wall, run him towards the helicopter, which was 150 meters away in the direction we're now getting shot at from. We deliver him to the helicopter, we get him up and out. Great. As that helicopter dusts up and all the brown dust that it was kicking up from the propellers dissipates, and we're turning around, running back towards the compound we came from. Now we see the bullets in the ground all around us plinking, and we're like, uh-oh, it got serious, because now you can see it, that fear grips you. Well, you have your objective, get back into cover. You don't have time to think about it. You just have to go. So then afterwards, none of us got hit with a bomb. We didn't have to deal with the fear of that. We were treating him. We had to deal with the fear of possibly losing him and that accountability of it being on our hands. Then it's the fear of, can we get him over there without getting shot? Then the fear of getting back. When all of that's done, I took my Kevlar helmet off my head and I slumped down with my back to a wall. And it was about 6 a.m. when all this took place. I wake up, it's nighttime. You never know how your body's going to react to an adrenaline dump. And in that case, I put all of my effort, all of my focus, and like a day's worth of calories into maybe 15 minutes of action. Until somebody else has even a slight inkling of what it's like to have so much pressure on one situation, all dependent on you not messing up, you don't know what it's like to take all of that adrenaline and all that power and hyper fixate on 2 to 3 menial tasks done expertly fast. Okay, well, the pendulum has to swing the other way. So I spent all that energy. My body went into factory reset mode and just powered down. And when I finally came to, they were like, yeah, you got watch. I'm like, well, of course I do. I just got rest. Like, got to get up there. But you don't think about it in that moment. But how we combat fear is different for all of us. But from at least that specific point of view, it's by saying it's okay to be afraid. I know I'm afraid, but I'm not going to be in the grips of it. I'm gonna focus my attention on the things that I can control in this situation. And the fear is actually worries. I'll be worried later. You put it on hold. It's like you have like 4 burners on your stovetop and you have this one boiling over on the front. And so you just casually shift it to the back burner and you can have it on a lower setting and let it just simmer down for a bit. It's still going to be a problem later. Like, but we'll deal with that later. Let's just put it off to the side and focus on things a little bit more manageable in the front. And then when you're ready, you can unpack that. You can deal with that later. But people will ask me, do I get nervous when I go compete or back when I used to still fight? Was I nervous often when I would go do it? And I would say all the time the same thing. Yes, of course I'm nervous. Well, why don't you look nervous? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I'm, cripplingly autistic, but I think it has more to do with the fact that when it's time for me to do those endeavors, I know it's fear inducing. I know it's anxiety inducing. I'll worry about that later because did I sign up for this event or not? That's a part of signing up. A part of signing up is knowing that there's going to be some anticipation and excitement. You just can't let it get the better of you. You have to focus yourself every time you feel your heart rate getting up or you're breathing heavy or your stomach's jittering. I don't know, go for a walk, do something and get that stress out of you. I don't care. Do push-ups and jumping jacks, burn it off, get warm, but don't let it control you because if you go into the match nervous, you'll act accordingly. If you think you will fail a thing, you'll most likely fail a thing. And I think that's why I love that line from Frank Herbert's books where he says fear is the mind killer. If you go in with a sharp mind, a lot is possible. But if you have this nagging sense of, I could fail, they could win, everything that couldn't go wrong, great. You're focusing on all that. Don't. Just allow yourself to say, I am in this moment riding this wave. And whatever the outcome, I'll worry about the outcome later. If I go into it carrying baggage, I'm fighting them plus me. The best part about baggage is you could put it on the floor and you can come back to it. So it's not that the fear hasn't been processed. Let me process it later. And that's probably the key difference between like myself and some other people, which is you'll see people go into matches where they should be afraid. And then if the person goes in and they're not, they usually perform really well.
Is there any similar stories, either you growing up, your time training in the Marines, or even in Afghanistan?
A classic example would be of overcoming fear would be when I was getting ready to get back into training in the martial arts from a knee injury that I thought was going to take me out of martial arts the rest of my life. I was in the Marine Corps and in boot camp, I took a rifle buttstock to the knee at a bad angle and it ended up blowing my knee out backwards. And I tore everything but my patella tendon. Now, you have a lot of ligaments in your knee that are for structural stability. ACL, MCL, TCL, PCL, LCL, right? All these cruciate ligaments that are interwoven and connected sometimes, and all this lattice work just to keep your knee from going in the directions it shouldn't. And the only thing I didn't tear was the patella right down the front of my kneecap. And that happened on training day 5 in boot camp. Now, a little bit of backstory. I'm a college educated 25-year-old man who was a former pro athlete. If I decided to be an officer in the Marine Corps at the time, I would have probably been a celebrated lieutenant, somebody who, you salute. I'd probably hang up, my championship belts and some magazine things in my office as I walk around with my coffee cup and I lord over people. That's not my style. So of course, even though I had a college degree, I decided that I want to go enlisted. And you're going to get talked down to, and you're going to be treated like scum of the earth. But I go in enlisted, and I wanted a regular boot camp experience. I don't get that. I get to Parris Island in South Carolina, and I'm on the bus, initially getting in at the middle of the night under cover of darkness, like every recruit who's ever gone to Parris Island always does. It's a part of the ritual of you get there, you're disoriented, and you have to stay awake, and you're put through these rigors, and it's done intentionally because it's supposed to be hard. So I get there, and I'm not expecting a film crew to be there, but I get off the bus, and there's bright lights lighter than this in my face with a camera right there. It takes me way too long, for as smart as I am, to figure out what's happening. Probably about 5 or 6 hours too long to figure it out. They're not filming any other recruits. They're just filming me. So after a while, I realized that they're doing a documentary on me in boot camp. And they follow me around for what is the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, MCMAP, my training there. They follow me to church, for crying out loud. And it's just, what does it take for a pro fighter to change gears in life and become a pro warfighter? And so they make this thing for the Boot newspaper down in South Carolina. And I remember one morning in February 2009, we wake up 4 a.m, lights, lights, lights. Everybody get online, Porter get on the quarterdeck. And that was the entire phrase. Lights, lights, lights. Everybody get online, Porter get on the quarterdeck. Now the quarterdeck is the front of the squad bay where we usually get punished. So I'm like, what did I do in my sleep to get punished? I get there and there's drill instructors I don't even recognize. Ones that aren't even from my platoon. And they're all waiting there. And so they tell me, get on my face, start doing push-ups, start doing this, start doing this. And I'm freaking out because I have no idea what I did wrong. And I thought I was an exemplary recruit. Meanwhile, training day 5, I get hit with the buttstock of a rifle in my knee that blows out my knee. And I am trying everything in my power to not get kicked out of boot camp or to start over. So I'm just gutting through it with a knee that is like flapping in the wind. And so they're having me like do squats and I can barely do them on one leg. And I'm like leaning and really favoring one side. And every time they'd make me do push-ups, I'd pretend they were harder than they were just so that I'd do more of those because it was easier on my knee. So I'm having to do a lot to protect myself and my integrity for my knee's sake while getting just completely wrecked by all these drill instructors that I still don't know what I did wrong. The recruits in the squad bay, they're doing all the normal things like getting dressed, going to the bathroom, hygiening, brushing their teeth, shaving. They come out, they sweep the squad bay. They're making beds. I'm still working out. Like 40 minutes has elapsed. I'm still getting crushed. They get ready to go to chow for breakfast. They go to chow. They come back from chow. They come with what's called a hot plate, which is my breakfast to go. It gets slammed on my back. There's food trickling down my ribs onto the floor as I'm doing push-ups. I could smell my food as it's cooking on my back. And they're just still having me do push-ups. And eventually, one of them comes in, slams the on-base newspaper in front of me. And there I am in a big picture on the cover. Pro fighter, hangs up gloves, picks up rifle. And it's my picture on the front cover. Now, for context, one of these drill instructors who's there, and I will only say nice things. His name was Staff Sergeant Perry. I say was because he's not with us anymore, and I'm not going to speak ill of the dead. But in that moment, he was pretty pissed. Meanwhile, I happen to see why he's pissed. He's got a picture that's maybe 2 inches tall right next to this gigantic picture of me. And I can tell while I'm in the middle of pushing up that this is about him being a African-American drill instructor during Black History Month and all of the things that he's done for the Marine Corps in his service. And whereas this should be this man's 12-year career being highlighted on the front page of the drill instructor's paper, instead it's about this recruit who's only been here for maybe a month. So they're not happy. Like, what did I do for Uncle Sam to make me get that spot on the cover? So I'm getting hazed for being something in my prior life. And they're trying to beat that out of me like a blacksmith beats the carbon and the impurities out of the metal. They're doing that to me. And I just have to accept it. They don't know how bad my knee is yet. They won't find out until training day 55 how bad my knee was.
Another 50 days.
50 days after the injury. 50 days after. We were at BWT, which is basic warrior training, where they take us in the middle of the woods for a few days. And we're doing night movements over obstacles with pop-up flares. There's barbed wire. There's like water traps and things you have to move over. And they even tell you, hey, when you're clearing an obstacle, if a flare goes off, get down into a slow silhouette and stay still until the flare goes away. Also, the second the flare goes up, close your eyes so that you don't kill your vision that you're getting acclimated to the dark with. I happen to be on the highest obstacle, one of the walls you have to like run and jump up over, as a flare goes off. So I'm on top of the wall and I just hug the wall. And I hear one of the instructors, while my eyes are closed, say, clear the obstacle. I'm like, okay. So I throw my legs over the side and I try to get down with my eyes closed. I think I'm landing on level ground like this. The ground was not level. So my bad leg lands on solid ground first. My other leg keeps going as this leg buckles and goes backwards. So now with my left leg now in my face, facing me with my toe pointed towards my nose, I'm like, I can't hide this anymore. So they take me to the hospital. And it's at that point that they're like, did this happen today? And I go, technically, no. And so as I'm explaining when the original incident happened and when I went through all this, my biggest fear was not the incident. My biggest fear was starting over. I have no problem doing something that's hard. I have a really hard time doing something that's hard twice. So as I'm explaining my story, I can already smell what's coming next. They're going to administratively separate me from boot camp, and I'm going to go back to being a civilian. Now, obviously, we're sitting here and you know, because you've seen like my shadow box in the dojo, that I ended up having a fairly storied career, even though it was a short time in the military. But I did a lot. This is a very early story, so you know what happened next. But how it happened is pretty cool. The company commander for my boot camp company, which was Lima Company on Paris Island 3rd Battalion, was a guy by the name of Captain Wilson. Now, Captain Wilson was what we call a Mustang. He was prior enlisted before he went commissioned. So he came in as the lowest rank in the enlisted side, got some schooling and education, worked himself up, became commissioned, then is now an officer. So although he's of a captain's rank, he's a little bit older than a normal captain should be. And he was always a very compassionate man when he was talking to the troops in boot camp. And I say troops, I mean the recruits. We never really had a heart-to-heart or a talk before that, but he was always around when the film crews were there and when the stories were being written and all this other stuff. And, you know, he always did his wellness checks and everything else. And when the incident with my knee took place, you know, he made sure that anybody who was responsible was held responsible. He wanted to make sure that there wasn't any direct neglect. And if there was, he was going to handle it. And man, he was fire and brimstone when it had to be. But when he talked to me, it was after my senior drill instructor, Thomas Viotti, came up to me, and he was a staff sergeant at the time. So the senior drill instructor, he talked to me and he's like, hey, you're probably going to get ADCEPT. I just need you to mentally prepare yourself for that. And I don't think a lot of people knew how badly I wanted to be a Marine. And so being somebody who was 18 and in college when September 11th happened and watching as I am now the only male member of my class 3 days after the event showing back up to class, because all the other male members of my class dropped out of college and immediately enlisted. Me being the broke kid from Long Island saying, well, I'm in school on scholarships. I can't let these go to waste. I'm also old enough to remember my uncles being in Desert Shield and Desert Storm and how quickly that was over. So I'm like, maybe this will be over quickly. How was I supposed to know that the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq were going to be the longest conflicts of our American history? So 2001 comes and goes. We're still at war. 2006, I'm done with college. They're still fighting overseas, but I'm still fighting professionally and I still have like some gas in the tank. So I wait until I accumulate a few more losses on my record before I decide like, okay, I'm going to take a break from fighting and now I'm going to do this while I'm still physically able. I was 25. 25 should not be a venerable age for the military. But when I tell you I showed up to boot camp and I was older than 2 of my drill instructors, that tells you everything you need to know. But despite me giving up a professional career and going into the military, I was still looked at as like a why are you here scenario by a lot of people. Now, my senior drill instructor didn't treat me that way, and he kind of gave me a little bit more leverage than I guess the average person. And he made me a squad leader, and he gave me like command over like at least 20 Marines to kind of look over, and that worked for a bit. And then I remember when I got fired from that position, it was because we had to do something physical, and at that point, the one drill instructor didn't know how bad my knee was. And so me still hiding it because I was still afraid of getting kicked out, like it cost me that billet in that job. And so when the senior drill instructor came in and was like, Porter, get up here. And I just made like the face, like, I'm not what you want right now. Like I'm not a squad leader. I said, get up here. And I was like, sir, this recruit's no longer a squad leader. And he's like, what? When did that happen? I was like, this morning, sir. He's like, oh, okay. So anyway, I get fired from that position and I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I can chill now. Nope. BWT happens. I get off the wall. My knee's now facing me. Great. We're back to the beginning. We're back to that part of the story where what's the next step? Senior drill instructor's telling me, hey, I know you really wanted this. It's looking like you're going to be administratively separated. I need you to mentally prepare for that. I tell him, you know why I'm here. I want this. Some of these other kids, no offense, I'm glad they found the military. They had no direction in life. They had no other options. They're here because this was it for them. I'm here so that they get to go home. Because if you don't have enough people who want to be there, who want to be leaders, who want to make sure that they can have that accountability for some other people to ensure their survival, how do those people get home? Because if you just have enough people doing the minimum or doing enough, that's the recipe for disaster. So as I'm sitting there like, you don't understand, I want this. To the point where he was like, yeah, I get it, but what can I do? And I was like, is there anyone you could speak to? And he's like, I'll talk to the company commander, but I have a strong feeling he's just going to tell you to pack your bags. So he goes and talks to Captain Wilson, who then comes to me and we have this talk where it is about my intent and why I'm here. And I give him the whole rundown of, I was that kid in school when September 11th happened. I was there to watch all these other members of my class go as I'm sitting there like too afraid to act, because if I act and it doesn't end up being a bigger conflict, I would have thrown away my scholarships. And now that I've done it, I feel like I'm that fleet dodger who did everything to not go to war. So it's like, this is my chance to prove that I wasn't too afraid to do the thing and that I did want to. It's just now this is the timing for it. And this is a better timing for me. Captain Wilson thinks for a second. He's like, I don't think there's anything we can do for you. So another day goes by and it's the day where I'm supposed to sign my paperwork. And I physically signed my discharge paperwork to the Marine Corps. And I'm getting ready to say my goodbyes. My bags are packed. Captain Wilson comes in and he's like, hey, you still have that signed piece of paper? I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, come with me into the office. And he's like, ushering me to where the drill instructors are. Now I'm seeing all of my drill instructors like I've never seen them before. Their campaign covers are off. They're just sitting around like regular people. They're not using their scratchy, screaming voices. And he's like, So Recruit Porter here has his discharge paperwork. Recruit Porter, this is, and he points to the battalion doctor. And he's like, he's going to show you this breg brace. And it's a exoskeletal brace that goes around your knee. And so he outfits me with this breg brace and he's like, how does that feel? Like, it feels great. He's like, the doctor's going to ask you some questions and we just have to be privy, but we can't answer these questions for you. And I am here to ask you to answer all these questions honestly and truthfully. So I put on the brace and the doctor's like, can you do a squat? Can you do a this? Can you do this? Now, for the better part of what is now almost 60 days of training, I've been on this bad leg. And now for the last several days, I've been on crutches. And my knee has been worse than it's ever been before. And despite that, all I'm hearing is opportunity cost. All I'm hearing is get through this, you will be a Marine. So he's like, can you do a squat? I can do anything if you tell me my goal is achievable. So he's like, can you do a squat? Yes, I can do a squat. Now, did I do it through pain? Absolutely. But I got through it. And I did enough to make the doctor feel like with the brace, I could finish the last 2 weeks of training because it's about 70 training days to become a United States Marine. So I'm within smelling the barn territory. The problem is there's 5 more graduation requirements. A physical fitness test, which is a 3-mile run, 20 pull-up maximum, 100 abdominal crunches. A combat fitness test, which is an 880-meter sprint, a maneuver under fire course where you're carrying things like ammo cans or another person on your back or dragging them. A ammo can lift, which is a lot of squats and thrusts. So still a lot of work on your legs. So you have the PFT, physical fitness test, combat fitness test, CFT, final table on the rifle range, which is done with standing and pivoting. Nothing bad that can happen there. A commander's readiness inspection where I have to stand at either parade rest or position of attention for upwards of hours in uniform. And then the crucible, which is a 54-hour enduro of obstacle course after firing range after firing range, and sleep deprivation and very little food. And that's your final graduation requirement that ends in a hike. So it's like, oh, you only have these 5 things. And here's what Captain Wilson did. He looked at my initial fitness test from before I entered the Marine Corps. He looked at my initial fitness test when I got to Parris Island. And he saw those scores, and they were fantastic scores. And then he looked at my first PFT after the knee injury. It was still a first-class PFT with no ligaments in my knee. So he looked at that and goes, you did that a week and a half after the injury that initially hurt you. And it was first class. If you can even just get the minimum with this brace, we'll pass you through boot camp. Because obviously it's a minimum standard for a reason, right? Like you have to get the minimum. If you think this brace can get you through these things, we'll keep you in. First things first, I'm on crutches and I have to shoot on table 2. So now I have a sling for my rifle. I go on crutches to the firing line. And there are people in Parris Island that are like, you shouldn't be here. And I'm like, haha, magic piece of paper says I can be here because Captain Wilson's going to let me shoot. So now I'm literally turning and pivoting on crutches and then leveling a weapon and shooting. I do not shoot well. And I will argue that if you think you can shoot well on crutches and you can get my score, I would love to see it. Because I thought I shot extremely well for someone who didn't have a leg to stand on, literally. So I get through that, and then we have our PFT and our CFT, and I get a first-class PFT again with a bad knee, mainly on the strength of doing, over 20 pull-ups and 100 crunches. That gets me 200 points. My run time was like 22 minutes for 3 miles. There were recruits who were getting 29 minutes on 3 miles. They didn't have torn ligaments in their knee. So I was still doing pretty good. I go to the CFT, and the good thing was it wasn't an absolute graduation requirement so much as they were trying to make it a graduation requirement in 2009. So when the day came for me to do it, they actually just said, you don't have to. So I got to dodge that bullet. I still have to do the whole crucible and the Commander General's readiness inspection. The inspection was the second hardest thing I had to do. because you're locked out position of attention for most of it. And so that hurt my knee a ton. But the good thing is I'd already done the crucible, which was the hardest thing before that. And during that, I had one drill instructor who told me every day he hated my guts. And when it came time to get assigned to one of your drill instructors for the crucible, everyone's hoping to get the senior drill instructor because he's like dad. He's like the nice one. I don't get him. I'm hoping I don't get the one who wants to eat my head off, Sergeant John Hidley at the time, Sergeant. Um, he and I ended up becoming really cool with each other. But during that time, he probably wanted to break me. So I get Sergeant Fiocchi, who was the sergeant then, and he was like doing everything in his power to make sure that I was challenged and it wasn't a freebie. But he didn't make me do a lot of the things that would have actually broken me. I get to make it through boot camp with 66 days of training on every torn ligament in my knee. And when I got handed my Eagle Globe and Anchor after the crucible, I didn't cry. And I'm looking around and there are these 18-year-old kids that are crying. They're like, this is the biggest achievement of my life. And it's like, no, my achievement was not getting administratively separated on day 5. So for me, like the EGA was a byproduct of just saying, I controlled my fear. This is my reward. I earned it. I wasn't given it. I wasn't in a situation where they set me up with T-ball and I had to knock it out of the park. It was hard. It was ridiculously hard. And if I just succumb to the idea that this sucks and I'm in pain and I don't want this anymore, the easy path was just opening my mouth or raising my hand any time 2.5 months prior. It takes a different kind of person to say, I have a goal and I understand that in the path of life, you can set your GPS with the best directions and leave at the best time of day and have a full tank of gas. But the second you get on the road, you have no idea what the weather, the other drivers, or any kind of conditions are going to be like. And you might be prepared or have to be prepared to pivot and pick a new direction or a new route. And even if it sets you back a little bit of time, time is a resource and we still have it. It's not a big thing to waste a little bit of time as long as you're moving in the right direction. What I don't want to do is return home. What I don't want to do is go in reverse. It's okay to even be stuck and stay put for a little while. That's probably second worst option. But as long as when you start back up, you keep going forward. And I think the bigger issue is some people will look for excuses for why not to do a thing. And I look for excuses on why I should finish it despite not having optimal arrangements. And when I think of fear as a enemy of people doing any kind of achievable goal, I have to ask them, is it because you're secretly looking for a way to defeat yourself because you don't know what to do with yourself once you are successful? Because we're all given the same amount of time to achieve our goals, a lifetime. What you do with it is on your terms. Me, I'm not going to be the person who's on my deathbed thinking about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas and the what ifs. That would kill me greater than any fear I had to conquer along the way, because regret is 1,000 times more toxic than beating the fear in the moment. I don't care if it's like fear of looking bad. Like that means nothing compared to regret. So the people who are too afraid to go into a dojo or go into a training space to train because they're afraid they'll look bad, it's even worse if 10 years, however many years later, where you could have been training that whole time, you get into an altercation where you could have used it. I'm really grateful for the fact that about 10 years ago, this past New Year's Eve, I was tapped into to go respond to a female Marine who was under duress. Her date at the time was getting physical with her, and I happened to be the closest Marine to her proximity. So they asked me to do a wellness check. And that's a nice way of saying, let's deal with this in-house before we get the cops involved. And so I go to do this wellness check and she was not good. And so I ended up having to respond to this gal. And, ultimately the situation got fairly out of hand, but I was able to get her out of the situation without breaking any laws and breaking faces. So I got her out of there, and it's great because one, we are there for each other, and there was a system in place for help, and help was offered and it was received. Great. Two, a lesson was learned. That person has gone on and is now doing jujitsu and 10 years later, right? But still is doing jujitsu and is doing things and is like taking ownership of their own well being. And to hear back from that person, even 10 years after the fact, because we communicated recently, and her saying to me, yeah, that time in my life was one where I let fear control all of my choices. And it was weird. It was fear of being alone, fear of not fitting in, fear of having an unconventional way of going through life where it's like, what do you mean you want to be single and not focus on, other people? And now it's fear of being taken advantage of, fear of being manipulated physically, mentally, sexually, whatever, fear of not having autonomy over your body. So I think the bigger question people need to ask themselves is: would you rather have to deal with fear in the moment of whatever your perceptions are, or the regret that comes from knowing you could have changed it in that moment? Because if you're not willing to go through that stress of doing the hard thing now, you don't get the rewards later, or you don't get the comforts that come from having it later.